Hello, I'm Colin Smith of Video Revealed, and I'm going to show you how to set up and customize the tangent ripple with Adobe Premiere Pro. This tutorial will be divided into two sections. The first one will be setting it up and showing it how to work it with the Lumetri Color Panel. The section after that is going to be more about customization. All right, so let's have a look. The Tangent Ripple really is a great new product. It's an entry-level panel for occasional colorists, editors, and students. Comes with some great mapper software, but right out of the box, it's going to work with Resolve, it's going to work with Scratch, SpeedGrade, anything that the Elements works with. There's a default mode that the Ripple's going to work with. It uses high resolution optical pickups inside to give you unbelievable precision when you're working with color. It has independent reset buttons for each one of the balls and the dials. It's got programmable A and B buttons in here. It's got a heads-up display on the screen. It's USB bus powered. It's lightweight, compact size, fits right on the desk, and really is something that I've been waiting for. I do a lot of my work in Adobe Premiere Pro in the Lumetri Color Panel, but I have to deal with using a mouse, and a mouse is just not the best tool to control color. So there's one setup we need to turn on in Adobe Premiere Pro. Once we're set up, then we can use the panels. Let's have a look. In the Preferences, in Control Surfaces, the preferences are in the Edit menu on Windows, the Premiere Pro menu on the Mac. We need to add a control surface, and in the device class, pick Tangent. Click OK, click OK. That's it. It's now set up, ready to go. And the first thing you'll notice is a heads-up display, which you can position anywhere, including on a secondary monitor if you want it. Now, I'm just going to position it over here right now and begin to use it with Premiere Pro. I'll also show you the mapper software, which we're going to use to customize the ripple. You'll notice down at the bottom, all of the element, the wave, and the ripple are all here to customize. So it's one piece of software for all of the tangent hardware. I love that. On the top of the ripple, you'll notice different modes: editing, Lumetri, basic, creative, curves, the color wheels, secondaries, and the vignettes. Each one of these is completely customizable, and we're using the default setting right now. Okay, I'm going to go to my color workspace, which will bring up the Lumetri Color Panel. I'm going to select my color panel and make sure that I have a clip selected. You'll notice that this is divided into 9 different squares, and each one of these is directly connected to what is on the ripple. So if I start to move this around, this particular one is the temperature. So you'll notice temperature is in the top, and it's the X for the ball. The way that you read this is X, Y, Z, or Z. And the top is X for temperature, and it's the leftmost ball. So I'm moving the ball to the left. You'll notice the temperature moves to the left. Move it to the right, temperature moves to the right. Oh, well then saturation would be over here on the right, so I can take saturation down. I can warm this up, and I can saturate that. Now the blacks would be the dial over here, and I can either turn the dial, and you'll see the black start to go down, or I can put my finger on this little indent here and spin this around if I wanted to make larger movements. At the same time, I could take the whites and start dialing these up and create this kind of a look. Again, I'm going to reset these by pushing the reset button, take the blacks down, and take the whites up. This is one of the things I love to do with a control surface, and why I really love the ripple is because a lot of times I want to do 2 things at once, and a mouse is one at a time. Okay, so that's the basic. That's what you've got to understand of X, Y for the balls, and Z or Z here for the dials. Now, you can see a before and after if you hold down the A and hold down the B. You can see there's my before, there's my after. You have to remember to have the Lumetri Color Panel selected. You see the blue outline around there. If I have my timeline selected and try A and B, it's not going to do anything. So make sure I have that selected and the clip selected. The other alternative that is built in is to hold the A key down, and the middle one, you can see up at the top, my heads-up display, this now works as a jog. So it can jog through the whole timeline. And by default, the Lumetri Color Panel is selecting each one of those clips for us. It will select one clip because we can only edit one clip based on the targeting over on the left-hand side. So if I get over to this one here, it's actually selecting the bottom of this composite of multiple clips. So you have to kind of be conscientious of which clip we're talking about. All right, so without the alternate down, if I just push B, it's set to cycle through each one of these modes. So just going through that, I can go all the way to the bottom, which is the vignette. Hit it again, it's in editing, and you can see that in the heads-up display. Hit it one more time and we're basic, and another time and we're now in the creative section. In the creative section, you can see again the controls that we have. One is the sharpness, so if I start moving my middle wheel, I'm going to start sharpening this up. Or conversely, removing that sharpness, making it a little bit softer. I'm just going to reset that. There's also the intensity of the look that we're using. So right now I don't have any look, and in fact, let me just reset my controls. I'm just going to reset my Lumetri controls on here. And if we choose a different look, and I'm going to choose something that has a bit of color to it. So you can see that we've added this Fuji film stock to our clip, and again, A, B, A, B to show before and after. There's also the intensity. So looking back at my controls, the intensity would be the left dial. So you can see I can take that intensity down to 0, or I can take that up. Very good, easy ways to customize this. And creative saturation is also down here. So I can take the creative saturation, and again, A, and B. I hope you're starting to understand how beneficial it is to have a control surface to be creative like this. Next up, hit the B again, and we'll go down to curves. There's nothing you can do in curves. In a future update, Adobe will release some kind of control. Right now, the only one that is set for curves is if you are set up for high dynamic range, the HDR range button is the only thing that's selectable. So it really doesn't apply, but here's one gotcha. And again, let me reset this so you can see the changes. Anytime that you are touching these controls, even when you're in curves, you'll notice a difference. So watch, this is getting darker and I'm increasing the contrast, but you're not seeing anything change in the RGB curves. Why is that? That's because even though I'm in curves, the color wheels are changing, and you can see those blue values mean that we've had a change here. So I'm going to reset those. So even though you have curves set up, you're actually changing the color wheel. If you wanted to, you could go into the mode and you could remove all of those so that it was doing nothing. Maybe you want that. Now here's the easiest one. Color wheels, 3 color wheels, 3 dials. This is exactly what you would expect. If I want to take the blacks down, open this up, go to the mid-tone, bring this up, maybe warm the whole thing up. I'm going to go to my middle dial and push that into the warm. Here's A, here's B, like that. If I didn't have to stop and explain, I'm just feeling a couple of dials in here, doing some at 2 of these at the same time, and I get the look that I want. Next up is the secondaries. And by default, the secondaries are going to control the correction down here at the bottom. And I'm going to go to this image here, and I want to recolor her shirt. So by default, you have to use the eyedroppers for color. So I'm going to click, and I'm going to sample a color right here. And you can keep adding to this color here by adding to the color, clicking all the different variations of color from light to dark. And when you go to change that color, and by the way, you can tweak those amounts down here at the bottom. So once I've come up with a key that I like, I can add a bit of denoise and a blur on this. Now the color wheel is going to control the color. So there are two different modes in the correction, three-way or a master. And in the master, then the center one will be controlled. So this is going to control all of the color and all of the luminosity for that change. Let me reset both of those. If you're on three-way, then it's exactly what you'd expect. I'm doing the same kind of three-way color correction, but I'm doing it with shadow, midtone, and highlight. Okay, pretty simple. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a second, and I'll show you how I've changed the mapping to control more of the hue, saturation, lightness, the key. And I think that's much easier to do with the ripple, and I love doing it with the element. So I've switched this up and done the key that way. Let's jump to this section here. And I'm just going to take the exposure up so we can see. And let's jump all the way down to the vignette. And the vignette is a great example of why a control surface is good. Watch this. I'm going to take my amount down. And at the same time, I'm going to get rid of the feather. So I want to be able to see this vignette a little bit easier where it is. So you'll notice in the heads-up display there are 4 settings there. We have 3 dials, but we're really talking about 4 sliders. So this is some smart programming by Adobe. The 3 main dials, which you would use to control that, are already mapped correctly, and feather, which is usually the thing you do at the end just to tweak it a little bit. But I wanted to show you again how using 2 controls is much better than just a mouse. So now I can see my vignette very easy. I want to show you that the roundness goes from a rounded rectangle to an oval to a circle. So between the midpoint and this roundness, if I wanted to now push that vignette just to the outside edges, I'm doing that with these 2 controls. Then I'm going to feather it. Then I'll take the intensity down a little bit. There's my A and B before and after. Vignette creation with the ripple, oh, it's so much better than using 1 mouse and 4 sliders. Now let's go back to the secondary for a second, and I want to show you my control. Back in the tangent mapper, I'm going to go to the File and Manage Control Maps, and I've already loaded one in here. And you can import and export your control maps. I'll select mine to make mine available. Now when I go to HSL secondaries, you'll notice that my controls are for the range, fall off, and mid of the hue, saturation, and lightness. So let's go and have a look at how this works. So I'm going to set my first color right down in here. I'm going to turn on the color guide. That's one little difference. By default, when you are using a mouse, the Lumetri Color Panel jumps to the gray, black, white mode while you're editing it. For me, I'm going to turn it on while I'm tweaking this. But watch how much easier this is for me to use the ripple to set that key. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here at the bottom and I'm going to open this up. And the same thing here. So I'm changing the middle and I'm changing the overall position. And I'm looking at this, watching this, and seeing which one makes a big difference. See how much easier that is? I did a little trick with this. Now, up to this point, I've been showing you how the ball is either an X or a Y. It's not both. I'm actually using it for 2 things. You'll notice that if in my heads-up display, I have 9 controls working at the same time. So if you watch the fall off down in the bottom right, notice how I have the fall off set to Y. So I can change the overall fall off And I am, to be honest, I'm probably nudging the X at the same time. It's impossible to not change X and Y at the same time if they're both engaged in the mapper. But for this, I don't mind, because it's the fall off is less critical for me than the overall saturation and hue that I'm moving around, and the dials, and it makes it so much easier. So that's my mapping that I thought would be a little bit easier to use. Now let's look at customizing. So back to the mapper. So back in the basics, you'll notice that the middle ones are not selected. And if I click on temperature, you'll notice there's X, tint X, and saturation X. And then these are the dials. So your first thought might be, well, how do I change this if I can't select it? So whenever you select something over here, you'll notice this control come up. You don't have to close this control. You'll notice that it will change. So it says left, middle, and right ball while you're clicking on it. So if I wanted to add something to that middle, you select the whole thing, then you come in here and you choose. So that's tracker ball Y, and I could go to the Lumetri, basic, and I've already got tints, so maybe I want shadows. So now shadows are Y and blacks are the dial, and temperature is X. There's a good chance you're going to change temperature and shadows because they're both connected. Honestly, I did go in and try this. I wanted to see how accurate I could be just doing Y or just doing X, and it's impossible really to not at least put a couple of numbers in there. But at least you know that you have that. Okay. You can also right-click directly on here. So if I wanted to change the ball, I can right-click and choose a different one right from here. You'll also notice combined. So combined is good for things like the shadow tint and shadow highlight. So if we actually go back to that, I'm just going to get rid of my changes. I'll just discard these changes. And if we go back to our creative, and let me reset this. By default, the shadow, tint, and highlight are already set here to my balls. So I'm changing let's cool down the shadows and warm up the highlight. And then there's an X on the middle dial, so I can change the basic tint balance at the same time. Okay? That's why in the creative, you'll notice the tint balance is here, but the shadow X and Y and the highlight X and Y are working both directions, but this one is just working that one direction. If you want to change any of these, you can right-click directly on them and change them. So a combined one, another good combined one is down here in the color wheels. So when we're in the color wheels, everything is combined. Shadows, midtones, highlights. Specular is only if we've got HDR footage in here. But you choose which control the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So you can see there's the midtone, there's the highlight. That makes sense for it to be mapped as a combination. You can also set for any of these that have a numeric value that you see over here on the right, you can actually change the display type. By default, the mapping has these as blank, but if I change it to number, so when I'm changing the blacks over here in basic, when I'm changing the blacks, you'll see that there's a number, and the number corresponds to the number over here. So you'll see 12, 10. We could also make that, instead of a number, we could make it a bar. Or you can make it a percentage. Now, not all of these have numbers. The ones that do have numbers. You can set that up, and that's independent. So every single one of these can be completely customized. And you'll notice that we have the alternate mapped here. Now, when I click, what I want to do is bring this over here and show you there's alternate mapping, and then there's the B button. Let's click on the A button and the B button. By default, the A button is set to select alternate function, And there's no alternate function because the A is the alternate function. If you click on B, you can see by default it's set to the next mode, and the alternate function is bypass. So that's important to show. If you right-click on the A control, you'll see a lot more choices. Remember, these are not dials, these are momentary buttons. So you can set them up to copy, paste. You can delete effects, set in and out points based on the clip your playhead is over. Export a frame, set markers, navigation, transport. Go to full screen monitor. So if I wanted to do this, let's do this. I'll click on this. So there we are, and I can hit my space bar now and play this. So I'm using my ripple to jump to full screen. You can set workspaces. You can zoom in and out. Panel focus. So this is a good one. Remember at the beginning I told you that you have to make sure that the Lumetri Color Panel is in focus. It's got the blue highlight around it. It's the one that you're working on for a lot of the ripple controls to work. Well, you could actually set up the A button to always bring that up. That's a good one. Or the scopes if you want. And then you can have it exporting, importing LUTs, going to high dynamic range, saving presets, solo mode, just to show you solo mode. Anytime I'm over here, I'm only looking at one panel. That's because in this section, I've got solo mode turned on. All right. And of course, the default is to select alternate function. You could go to the next knobs in the bank, next mode, go to, shuttle, all of these things. So I'm going to go back to my alternate. Same thing on the B. If I click on that, all of those same controls are inside there. Now, the last thing I want to mention is in the file menu, panel configuration, there's a button up here. Ripple emulates the tangent element TK. So that is the normal 3-wheel, 3-ball center, and it will work automatically. And you notice when I do that, it really shuts everything else off. Use this only when you have an application that doesn't support it. You'll notice that when we jump into speed grade, instantly out of the box, everything works. Right? Simple, right out of the box. A couple of other things. You can select the application. Right now it's set to auto select. You can also set the duration, not only the size, but the duration of the heads-up display, how long it stays on the screen. There's small, medium, and large, and whether you want it all the way to infinite, it's going to stay up on the screen the whole time. Last thing I want to mention is the sensitivity to these controls. So you'll notice that by default there's tracker ball and ring sensitivity, and they're set to global, and the default is to medium, but you could turn these up or down. With a finer result, it's going to take more moves to move that in there. And with a coarse one, it's going to take fewer movements to get to that point. Again, that's globally customizable. So if you have big ham hands and you move this a lot, you maybe want to turn that down a little bit. So that's the global setting plus customization for every single one of the modes and every single one of the controls that you have. This is really incredibly customizable. Right out of the box, I think Adobe's mapping is smart, although I like to change the secondary key to those controls. So I hope you found this informative, and I hope this helps you understand how to set up the tangent ripple to begin to use it as a wonderful control surface with Adobe Premiere Pro.